So today is the fourth Sunday of Pascha. Pascha is the first Sunday of Pascha, so this is the fourth Sunday of Pascha. And we continue our reading from the Gospel of St. John. Now, over the last 2 weeks, kind of showed you how the Gospel of John utilizes parallelism or ring structure to show themes. For example, the bridegroom of the church, how that theme is developed in the Gospel of John, both at the beginning and then as a reprise at the end. And that happens throughout the entire Gospel of St. John. Each section has that kind of structure, and then the whole Gospel has that type of a structure to it. And so today we see a shift in themes, because it's like the rings of Saturn. We're entering into a new layer of the rings, so it kind of changes color, if you will. And so the theme that we now enter into has identifying markers to it by which you can see it where it appears first and then where it appears again later in the Gospel at its reprise, I'm calling it. And these markers are, there's a pool of water, there is a perceived violation of the Sabbath, and 3, there is a miracle of healing accompanied by a question of faith. So if you know your Gospel of John, you may recognize that this is not the only story in that Gospel that includes these 3 markers. A pool, a Sabbath violation, and a healing. What's the other story?
Samaritan woman.
No. No. Try again. What do we read in 2 weeks from today? I heard it.
Blind man.
The blind man. Sunday, the Gospel of the man born blind. In that Gospel, you have the exact same markers. The pool, in reverse order now, this one starts at the pool, that one ends at the pool, right? Because it's always in reverse order. The pool of Siloam, there's the man who is healed, and they accuse him of breaking the Sabbath. And there's the question of faith involved in it as well. So in 2 weeks, we'll look at that as well. And this story of both of these are rather an obvious parallel, but there are some rather subtle cues as well that underlie this parallelism. For example, at the beginning of today's Gospel, we are told that this event took place at the pool just outside where? The Sheep's Gate. The Sheep's Gate. If you go to John chapter 10, which is the section immediately following the story of the man born blind, Jesus Christ launches into a lesson about what? I am the good shepherd. In fact, he says, I am the door of the sheep. I am the sheep's gate. So you see the parallels are happening there. So under bookending these stories and actually kind of theologically undergirding these stories of miracles is the theme of Jesus the Good Shepherd. Last week we looked at Jesus the bridegroom. This week we look at him as the Good Shepherd. These are not coincidences. It is through Christ that we find our healing and our wholeness. It is through him that we go in and out and find pasture. It is through him that we take up our bed and walk, that we finally see the light, etc., etc. It is through him that we're made whole. The sheep hears the shepherd's voice, and knows him and follows him. The 2 miracles that we have here in John play on the theme of knowing who Jesus is and then following him. Now, they're not the same though, and that's part of the point. Let's look at how they're presented today in John chapter 5, and then in 2 weeks we'll come back and look at it in John chapter 9. First of all, what about this pool? The pools of Bethesda. For a long time, these pools were kind of lost, and people thought that, well, we don't think they really existed. We think they're more of a metaphor because, the 5 porches kind of represent the 5 books of the law, or maybe the 5 senses. And so it probably wasn't a real place, and therefore it probably wasn't really written by somebody who was really there, and the Gospel of John was written much later. See, this is how the logic goes. Guess what? They found it. In 1964, as early as the 19th century, they discovered some of the evidence, but in 1964, the archaeological excavators uncovered the entire complex. And guess what they found? The pool and 5 porches. Which was really odd because, it's an odd number and it's an odd shape. Normally you might think you'd have 4. But in this case there was actually this it was like a 5-sided place, if you will. And so in every case, just that we've seen where archaeology has been employed, we found confirmation of the details of the unique testimony of John. So we know who it is who was given witness, and we know that his witness is true, as the gospel itself says. Now this place was in use as a place of healing from at least the 1st century BC. So it was known since maybe the 8th century BC, where they had created a reservoir and a dam and a pool, but it was becoming a place of healing only quite recently. And later, the Romans, when they conquered the city, they converted it into what's called an Asclepion, after Asclepius, the pagan god of healing and medicine. And it was a pagan hot springs, if you will. Not that it was hot, but it was a place of healing. But at this time, in the time of Jesus, it's not a pagan place. It's a place where the Jews can go. And in fact, it probably fulfilled the role of a mikvah, or a ritual bath. Now, that's an interesting thing in itself, because those types of places really didn't come into vogue in Judaism until around the 1st century BC, and in particular, they were popular among people like the Essenes and the Qumran community and so forth. So it was kind of the new place to go, relatively speaking, in the scope of history, if you will. And so Jesus is there, and it's not an inappropriate place for him to be there. And because the story says that the water would be stirred at certain times, that an angel would come and trouble the waters, that means that the water was particularly good for its role as a purifier. In the mikvahs, you needed to have living water, or moving water is what that means. But living water, zav, is what that was most holy or most powerful for healing. We're going to look, that might remind you of something which you already mentioned. This well of the Samaritan woman. I will give you living water. We'll talk about that next week, the image of living water. So in any case, this was a very interesting place to be. It was a real place, and it had its own history. After Hadrian came and rededicated the city as a Roman city, it became a pagan temple. When the Romans became Christian in the 4th century, then it became a church. And then for centuries it was like that, and then it was rebuilt during the Crusades and so forth, and it's been rebuilt. And so it was layers of stuff on top of it, and they finally excavated it and found it in 1964. But in this place, many poor souls were hoping for their chance at healing. We have a lot of people that come into our region today, right? They go to the same place, Bethesda. They're looking for help from our national health institutes, from our Walter Reed Hospital, and so forth. This was the equivalent for Jerusalem at the time, if you will. It was a place of healing where people could come. But one among these people that was there was quite wretched, right? It says that he had an infirmity for 38 years. Though we don't know how long he had actually been sitting and waiting at the pool. We shouldn't read that as saying he was waiting at the pool for 38 years. But it does say that when Jesus saw him, he saw that he was in that condition for a long time. So we can surmise that he'd probably been hoping for his chance at that pool of Bethesda for a long time and not getting it, right? So he's quite frustrated. And you heard the rest of the story, how he talks with him about it. But before we go on, I want to talk to you about this number 38. You know, numbers get dropped in the Gospels here and there, but they always mean something. And often they're quite significant. The number 38 doesn't seem like a particularly significant number, does it? And it's not a nice round number like 40, right? We know that, but it's really important, 40. Do you know where the only other place in the Bible that the number of years, 38 years, appears? Anybody have any idea? It's in your favorite book, Deuteronomy. How many of you have read Deuteronomy lately? It's too bad, it's really good. In Deuteronomy 2, we are told that after the people of God were led into the wilderness and they rebelled against God, they lost faith in his promise to bring them into the land of their own, because they saw the cities of the mighty ones before them, the Anakim, the giants, right? They lost faith, and they rebelled, and they were unfaithful to God. And so as a result of that, they were forced to wander in the wilderness for another 38 years. And so let me read to you about that. Deuteronomy, the second law, is what that means, is Moses giving them the summary of their experience before they enter into the promised land, finally, after that 38 days. But here he's first explaining how they got into the predicament of having to wait that long. So in Deuteronomy 1, starting at 26, we read, "Nevertheless, you would not go up to the promised land, but you rebelled against the command of the Lord your God. You complained in your tents and said, 'Oh, because the Lord hates us, he has brought us out of the land of Egypt to deliver us into the hand of the Amorites to destroy us.'" That was the local pagan kingdom that they were facing at that moment. "Where can we go up? Our brethren have discouraged our hearts, saying, 'The people are greater and taller than we. The cities are great and fortified up to heaven. And moreover, we have seen the sons of giants,'" the Anakim there. So they've just gone through the most incredible thing in the history of the world, the Exodus, right? The Passover through the Red Sea, the plagues in Egypt. They have seen the pillar of fire and the cloud by day and the manna in the wilderness. And they've seen all the promises of God's goodness. And the spies come back, Caleb and Joshua come back from spying out the promised land and say, "Oh man, there's some tall people there." And they lose their minds. "We can't go, they're too big and scary. Somebody was there before us, and they get in the way, and we can't do anything about it." Does any of that sound a little bit familiar? Because underneath it is the same kind of spirit, wailing spirit, if you will, of that paralyzed man in Bethesda, right? Somebody always comes in front of me, somebody bigger and stronger and faster, and they get in, and I miss my chance, and who's going to help me get there, right? It's the same kind of complaining, bitter, fearful spirit. So Moses continues in his chastising of his people. He says, "Then I said to you, do not be terrified or afraid of them. The Lord your God who goes before you, he will fight for you, according to all he did for you in Egypt before your eyes. And in the wilderness, where you saw how the Lord your God carried you, as a man carries his son, in all the way that you went until you came to this place. Yet for all that you did not believe the Lord your God, who went in the way before you to search out a place for you, to pitch your tents, to show you the way you should go, in the fire by night, in the cloud by day. You did not believe in him after all he did. He carried them all that way, through the Red Sea, through the wilderness, like a man carries his son." What a beautiful image. And so in the same spirit, the paralytic quails, because I have no one to carry me and put me into the water. I have no one to carry me like his son. But the truth is he did. He had someone to carry him all along. He was one of God's chosen people. He was about to find out how true that was. He was about to be lifted up by the same one who lifted the people out of Egypt. And Moses continues in verse 34, "The Lord heard the sound of your words and was angry, and took an oath, saying, 'Surely not one of these men of this evil generation shall see that good land of which I swore to give your fathers, except Caleb the son of Jephunneh. He shall see it, and to him and his children I am giving the land on which he walked, because he wholly followed the Lord.'" And also Joshua, as Deacon Nicholas is fond of saying, Caleb and Joshua, the noble spies of the Bible. Yes. Yes. And the intelligence service of the people of God, they were the ones who were the only two that were blessed to enter into the kingdom of God. Even Moses did not receive the blessing to enter the Holy Land because of this. Even, he says, "The Lord was also angry with me for your sake, saying, 'Even you shall not go in there. But Joshua the son of Nun, who stands before you, he shall go in there. Encourage him, for he shall cause Israel to inherit it. So Joshua, after Moses, will lead the people of God into the land of promise. And moreover, your little ones and your children, who you say will be victims, who today have no knowledge of good and evil, they shall go in there. To them I will give it, and they shall possess it. But as for you, turn and take your journey into the wilderness by the way of the Red Sea. Take a right turn and go the long way around. No. Take 38 years to get back. Have you ever seen that little thing where they show the Google Maps? How long would it take to walk from the Red Sea to the border of Israel? Walking? Huh?
10 days.
It's like 10 days.
10 days.
10 days. They should have taken them 10. In fact, they did, right? They got there. They sent people in. They spied the land. They were on the edge. But they didn't believe. And so God said, take the long way. Take 38 years. And what happened? Well, they were ashamed of that. They were ashamed of their quailing and their cowardice and their lack of faith. But they hadn't really gotten the message. They still hadn't figured it out. So what happens? Moses says, then you answered and said to me, we have sinned against the Lord. We will go up and fight, just as the Lord our God commanded us. And when every one of you had girded on his weapons of war, you were ready to go up into the mountain. But the Lord said to me, tell them, do not go up to fight, for I am not among you, lest you be defeated before your enemies. So I spoke to you, yet you would not listen, but rebelled again against the command of the Lord, and presumptuously went up to the mountain. And the Amorites who dwelt in that mountain came out against you and chased you as bees do. How humiliating, right? Chased you. You ever been a kid and run away from the bees, right? When they come swarming. And you drove you back. And then you returned and wept before the Lord, but the Lord would not listen to your voice, nor give ear to you. So you remained in Kadesh many days, according to the days that you spent there. So they actually just spent about the 38 years kind of wandering in one area, because they were humiliated. But see what they did. See what they did. At first they wouldn't believe the goodness of God, they wouldn't trust in God, and so they wouldn't listen to God. Then, when they were ashamed of that fact, they let their pride take over and said, well, we're going to do it, whether God is with us or not. But that's not how it works either. You see, this is the two sides of the coin of sin. We have either despair, hopelessness, where we think, God hates us, God has abandoned us. Or we have the other side. I will do it. Hell or high water, no pun intended. With or without God's help. And that's just as erroneous, just as sinful, just as mistaken. They had a problem of faith. They did not have their faith in the right place. So let's get back to the paralytic. Here he is. The first of a miraculous healing on a Sabbath involving a pool, and he himself is an image of the whole people of God that wandered in their infirmity for 38 years in the wilderness, right? He had to suffer for that time before he could be made whole, before he could enter the land of promise, go back into the temple, into that image of paradise that it is. And in 2 weeks, we'll see the healing of the man born blind, who responds the right way to the call of God. He responds with courage. He's not afraid to testify to who Jesus is. He's not afraid to face the faithlessness of those around him, but he stands up for the truth. When he's accused of breaking the Sabbath, or of Jesus breaking the Sabbath. But here, Jesus nonetheless heals the paralytic in his body. But it really isn't clear if the man ever really came to a saving faith. We don't know what happened to him in the end, past this just section. We do know that he said he did not know who Jesus was. He did not recognize him or think of him as anybody in particularly special. And so the gospel says that after the man was found by Jesus in the temple, notice it's not the other way around. He didn't go and find Jesus, but Jesus found him. He wasn't looking for him. He went, the paralytic who was healed, went and told the authorities who had questioned him, and said, it was Jesus who healed me. Why did he do that? Why did he do that? Because after he was healed, Jesus said, take up your bed and walk. And he encountered the authorities. And the authorities said, why are you carrying your bed? Who told you you could carry your bed? Don't you know it's the Sabbath? That's against the law. And of course, now he's in trouble, right? He went from the frying pan into the fire, into the deep water, if you will. So he is trying to cover himself. When he goes to the authorities, he's not going to say, good news, it was Jesus who healed me, and I want to share the gospel of his kingdom and make you a believer too, right? The blind man born blind is willing to stand up and preach faith in Jesus. This man is just saying, don't accuse me anymore. I didn't break the law, this guy made me do it, and here's who he was. So it's not clear that he ever came to any kind of faith, which is sad. I mean, sometimes God heals us, and it doesn't in the body, but it makes no difference for our soul. Sometimes we can see a miracle happen in our life, and we remain obstinate and unmoved. And thus, what Jesus says to him in the temple makes a lot more sense, right? He says, see, you have been made well. Sin no more, lest a worse thing come upon you. There was a tradition at one time that actually this man was the same man who slapped Jesus in the court of the high priest, saying, do you speak to the high priest like that? That's not an Orthodox tradition. I pray that that's not true, because it's a horrible fate for that man. But nonetheless, Jesus seems to be intimating to him, you could do worse. You are not yet out of danger. You have not yet sorted yourself out properly. But in the gospel of the blind man, Jesus makes it very clear that it is not because of anybody's sin that the man is born blind, but for the glory of God. And he doesn't lay any kind of warning at the feet of the blind man. What these stories tell us today, brothers and sisters, in conclusion, is that we need to be mindful of the faith that we have been given, lest we fall into the same mistakes of people long ago. The people of God in Deuteronomy or in John or at any other time are no better, no worse than any of us. We are not more enlightened and they are not more ignorant. We are all the same people with the same humanity from generation to generation, and we face the same temptations and the same struggles. We make the same mistakes. If they could fall into the same type of error after going through, like I said, the most amazing miracle in the history of the world with the Exodus, who are we to think that we're going to do so much better after passing through the image of that in baptism? How are we to think that we are going to stand so strong when they fail? So we read, in conclusion, I'll close with Hebrews chapter 2. The apostle tells us, therefore we must give the more earnest heed to the things we have heard, lest we drift away. For if the word spoken through angels proved steadfast, and every transgression and disobedience received a just reward, how shall we escape if we neglect so great a salvation, which at the first began to be spoken by the Lord, and was confirmed to us by those who heard him, God also bearing witness, both with signs and wonders, with various miracles and gifts of the Holy Spirit, according to his own will. May God bless us, help us, keep us, and save us by his grace, always now and ever, and unto ages of ages. Christ is risen.